The stars above Earth had always been distant and mysterious, shining silently in the night sky. People looked up at them with curiosity, with hope, and sometimes with fear. But no one truly expected that something would ever look back. For generations, humans had wondered if they were alone in the universe, yet the thought of someone actually arriving from those endless stars felt like fantasy. That illusion broke the day the Conquerors came. They did not sneak in quietly, nor did they hide their presence. The sky itself became their stage. One morning, satellites caught sight of massive ships sliding into orbit, ships so large they blotted out parts of the heavens. They were dark, sharp, and mechanical, built not for beauty but for control. Humanity had launched rockets, space, stations, and probes, but compared to these giant machines, Earth's technology looked like toys. For the first time in history, people realized they were no longer the most advanced beings in their own skies. At first, confusion reigned. Governments rushed to understand what was happening. Scientists scrambled for answers and news channels filled with speculation. Some believed this was a moment of peace, a long-awaited meeting with intelligent life. Others warned that no civilization would arrive with such a show of power unless it meant to dominate. But before humans could agree on what to think, the Conquerors made themselves clear. A message echoed across the planet. It wasn't spoken in any human language, yet every person understood it instantly. The words carried the weight of superiority, as though they had been crafted to remind humans of their smallness. The Conquerors announced that Earth was now under their control. They called themselves rulers of countless worlds, victors of endless battles. Humanity, they said, had two choices: surrender and serve, or resist and be erased. The shock rippled through every city, every village, every corner of the world. Some people froze with fear, convinced there was no hope against such overwhelming power. Others clenched their fists in anger, unwilling to bow. But no matter how people felt, one truth was impossible to ignore. Earth was no longer alone, and the visitors were not friends. The Conquerors did not waste time. Their ships cast long shadows over the skies as smaller craft descended, scanning cities, testing defenses, and watching the reactions of the people below. Their movements were calculated, their confidence unshaken. This was not the first world they had tried to dominate, and to them, it would not be the last. They expected humanity to break quickly, just as countless other species had before. Yet, as the days passed, something unusual caught their attention. Humans did not behave the way they expected. Instead of bowing instantly or scattering in chaos, people seemed to pause, to take a breath, and to think. There was fear, yes, but there was also a spark of defiance. Where other civilizations might have collapsed under the first display of power, humanity held its ground, quietly observing and quietly preparing. The Conquerors dismissed it at first. They saw humans as fragile creatures, with soft bodies and short lives, bound to a planet that was harsh even to its own children. They knew Earth was called a death world in whispers across the galaxy, but to them, that meant nothing. They believed they had broken far stronger and far more dangerous species than these small, unarmored beings. To the Conquerors, humanity was simply another prize to claim. But Earth had a history the invaders did not understand. Humanity was shaped by struggle. From the freezing tundras to burning deserts, from towering mountains to stormy seas, people had learned to survive everywhere. Every generation had faced hardship, wars, disasters, famine, disease, and still pushed forward. Humans were not the strongest or the fastest, but they were stubborn. They carried inside them a refusal to surrender that no invader could see from the outside. This truth revealed itself in small ways at first. When alien patrols landed in villages, people did not run. They watched, silent and unflinching. When cities were threatened, leaders refused to kneel immediately. Even as the conquerors tried to intimidate, humanity did not give them the instant submission they had expected. That patience unsettled the invaders, though they did not yet realize why. Across the globe, ordinary people gathered together, sharing stories of the ships in the sky. Some spoke with fear in their voices, others with courage. Parents held their children a little tighter, unsure of what the future held, but unwilling to let despair take over. Soldiers looked up and swore they would defend their homes no matter the odds. Farmers in distant fields, workers in busy factories, students in crowded classrooms, everyone felt the weight of the moment. The conquerors thought they had arrived to face one species. What they did not see yet was that they were facing billions of hearts beating together. For the conquerors, this was only the beginning of their campaign. For humanity, it was the beginning of a story that would define them forever. The arrival of the conquerors was not just the moment aliens came to Earth. It was the moment humans learned what they were truly made of. The threat was terrifying, yes, but within that fear, something powerful was being born. Night after night, the massive ships hovered in orbit, a reminder that Earth was under watch. People could look up and see their glowing outlines crossing the stars. It felt as though the universe itself had come closer, pressing against Earth's atmosphere. But beneath that heavy presence, life continued. Lights still shone in homes. Voices still rose in song. Laughter still echoed in neighborhoods. Even in the face of invasion, humanity did not forget to live. The conquerors could not understand this. They measured power in weapons, in fleets, in numbers. But humanity's strength was something less visible, something quiet and stubborn that could not be erased by fear. And though the conquerors did not know it yet, they had made their first mistake. They had arrived thinking Earth would be like every other world they had crushed before. They did not realize they were stepping onto a stage unlike any they had ever seen. The arrival of the conquerors was meant to be the start of humanity's end. Instead, it became the spark that would ignite something far greater. The invaders thought they came to rule, but what they had truly done was awaken the unyielding spirit of a world that had survived against all odds since the beginning of time. And as Earth stared back at the sky, one thought began to take root. In every human heart, perhaps the conquerors were not as unstoppable as they believed. The conquerors had arrived with their towering ships and their words of dominance, but words alone were not enough. They wanted to prove to humanity that resistance was pointless, that fighting back would only bring pain. To them, it was routine. Every new world required a demonstration of strength, a reminder of who held power. And so, the testing began. At first, the tests seemed almost like games to the conquerors, though to humans they were far from playful. Strange craft descended into the atmosphere, scanning the land with beams of light, mapping mountains, oceans, and cities with unsettling precision. Wherever they appeared, the air grew heavy with unease. The conquerors wanted humans to feel small, to know they were being watched, measured, and judged. They started with displays in the sky. Great bolts of energy flashed above cities, turning night into day for seconds at a time. These bursts left no destruction, but the message was clear. If they wanted to, they could erase whole regions in an instant. It was intimidation, pure and calculated. They wanted humanity to break without a fight. But humans did not collapse. People stood in the streets, necks craned upward, watching the lights with narrowed eyes. Fear was there, yes, but also a strange calm. It was as if humanity, in its own stubborn way, refused to give the invaders the satisfaction of seeing them crumble. When intimidation alone failed, the conquerors moved to harsher trials. They sent down soldiers, not men or women, but towering creatures bred for war. Their armor gleamed with alien metals, and their movements were sharp and efficient. They marched into villages and cities, not to kill, but to test. They knocked down walls, shattered doors, and dragged people into the open, waiting to see who would kneel. The Conquerors believed that in these smaller encounters, humanity's spirit would crack. But something unexpected happened. In those very moments, ordinary people resisted in quiet ways. Farmers stood in front of their fields, refusing to step aside. Workers locked arms in front of their factories. Families pulled each other close, making a wall of human determination. They did not have the weapons to fight, but they had something else, the refusal to let go of their dignity. The Conquerors were puzzled. On other worlds, such actions would have ended quickly with surrender. But here, resistance seemed to spread like fire. For every human who gave in out of fear, 10 others stood taller. Even unarmed, even vulnerable, they showed something the invaders had not accounted for, unity born out of hardship. The invaders pushed harder. They began to test Earth's defenses, sending attacks against satellites and communication networks. Some went dark, leaving parts of the world in silence. Power grids flickered. Transportation systems stalled. It was meant to isolate humans, to make them feel cut off from each other. But again, the Conquerors underestimated their opponents. In the absence of satellites, humans built ground networks. When power went out, communities lit fires, shared food, and adapted. The very challenges meant to weaken them instead revealed their resilience. The Conquerors also wanted to measure physical endurance. They captured groups of people and placed them in harsh environments, scorching deserts, icy wastelands, oxygen-thin, mountains, thinking they would crumble quickly. Yet, time and again, the results astonished them. Humans adapted. They pushed their bodies, drawing strength from sheer willpower. They did not give up, even when exhaustion should have claimed them. Many collapsed, but they rose again, fueled not just by survival instinct, but by the thought of family, of home, of something greater than themselves. To the Conquerors, this was confusing. They were used to species who yielded, who chose submission over suffering. But humans seemed almost to thrive under pressure, as though challenge itself was part of their nature. It was not strength in muscle alone, it was strength of spirit. The Conquerors escalated further. They unleashed machines into forests and plains, beasts of metal that tore through landscapes, hunting for signs of rebellion. They expected chaos, screaming, and collapse. Instead, humans fought back, not with advanced weapons, but with cleverness. Traps were set. Machines were lured into swamps where they sank and vanished. Groups of hunters with nothing more than courage and makeshift tools dismantled enemy scouts piece by piece. Every small victory spread whispers across the land. Humanity could bleed the Conquerors, and that thought alone filled people with fire. The Conquerors had wanted to test strength, but what they found was not what they expected. They found a species that refused to break. They found creativity, stubbornness, and unity. Where fear should have led to submission, it instead fueled determination. For the first time in countless campaigns, the Conquerors began to feel a faint, unfamiliar sensation: doubt. Meanwhile, among humanity, something powerful was taking root. Each test became a story passed from village to village, city to city. People spoke of the farmer who stood before armored soldiers, the children who refused to cry under alien lights, the workers who protected their homes with nothing but their bodies. These stories grew, weaving together into a shared belief. If they stood together, perhaps they were not as weak as the Conquerors believed. Even soldiers of Earth, who had at first felt powerless against the invaders' technology, began to study the enemy. They observed the patterns of the alien machines, the weaknesses in their movements, the moments when their armor failed. Knowledge spread quickly, like sparks leaping from one fire to another. Humanity's greatest weapon was not its guns or bombs. It was its ability to learn, to adapt, and to share. The conquerors could sense the shift, though they refused to admit it. They told themselves these were only minor delays, small inconveniences before inevitable victory. But deep inside, unease grew. Other worlds had been easier to tame. Other species had broken faster. Humanity, however, seemed to be made of something different, something they had not encountered before. The tests continued, harsher and more relentless. But with each one, the conquerors learned less about humanity's weakness and more about its strength. The very trials meant to crush Earth instead hardened it, like fire forging steel. On the surface, life was difficult. Cities bore scars from alien presence, families lived under constant tension, and the future was uncertain. Yet in those shadows, humanity discovered a unity it had rarely known before. Divisions of language, culture, and nation blurred. People who had once lived separate lives now stood side by side, bound by the simple, unshakable truth that they were all human, and their survival depended on each other. And so, the conquerors, in trying to test humanity's strength, had unknowingly revealed it. They had thought they were studying prey. Instead, they were awakening something far more dangerous, a species that had spent its entire existence surviving the impossible, a species that, when pushed, only grew stronger. The conquerors had come to Earth to prove their dominance. But with every test, with every failed attempt to break the human spirit, they were writing the beginning of their own lesson. One day soon, they would realize that humanity was not the fragile species they believed. They had stepped onto a death world, and the true testing had only just begun. The tests had gone on for weeks, then months. The conquerors believed they were wearing humanity down. They thought that by isolating cities, cutting supplies, and testing endurance, they were forcing humans toward surrender. But what they did not understand was that with every hardship, humanity grew closer, tighter, and more united than ever before. At first, survival had felt scattered. Villages defended themselves in small groups, soldiers fought in isolated pockets, and families struggled quietly within their homes. But slowly, stories began to move across the world like sparks in the wind. A town that had outsmarted alien machines inspired the next. A group of workers who rebuilt a power line with bare hands encouraged others to keep fighting. Even those who had felt hopeless began to see something extraordinary happening. Humanity was no longer facing the conquerors as individuals, but as one people. For centuries, humans had been divided by nations, by languages, by beliefs. Yet under the shadow of alien ships, those differences started to matter less and less. When the conquerors tried to pit groups against each other by offering false promises of safety, humans refused. When they tried to reward betrayal, there were fewer traitors than expected. The shared struggle bound humanity together in ways no treaty, no negotiation, and no leader had ever managed before. Communities that had once been separated by oceans found ways to talk, share, and coordinate. Broken satellites were patched together, radios hummed with secret transmissions, and coded messages carried across continents. Humanity was building its own network, not just of technology, but of spirit. People were no longer saying, "My land, my people." Instead, they were saying, "Our planet, our kind." The conquerors noticed this shift, though they could not fully understand it. On other worlds, pressure created fractures. Species fought among themselves for scraps of safety. But here, pressure had the opposite effect. It created unity. The conquerors had hoped to break humans apart. Instead, they were welding them together like steel. In cities, strangers helped one another as if they had known each other their whole lives. In villages, people shared food with those who had none. Soldiers and civilians stood shoulder to shoulder, protecting not just their own families but everyone's. Every loss was felt as a shared wound, and every victory was celebrated as a shared triumph. Humanity was discovering something deeper than survival. It was discovering itself. This unity gave rise to new courage. Where once people had hidden in fear, now they stepped forward. Volunteers lined up, ready to help however they could. Some learned to fight, some repaired equipment, some carried supplies through dangerous zones. Even the simplest acts, like a child handing water to a tired fighter or a neighbor rebuilding a home, carried weight. Each act whispered the same message: we are not alone in this. The Conquerors tried harder to crush this spirit. They launched larger assaults, surrounding whole cities with their machines. They expected panic, chaos, and surrender. Instead, they found something they had never seen before: entire cities standing as one. Civilians worked alongside soldiers, building defenses from rubble and scrap. Farmers brought food from the countryside, engineers repaired broken systems, and healers cared for the wounded with whatever they had. When alien machines advanced, they were met not just by armies, but by entire populations refusing to bow. What struck the Conquerors most was that humans did not simply fight with weapons, they fought with belief. Every face carried the same determination, every voice carried the same defiance. To the Conquerors, this was unnerving. They had crushed countless worlds, yet none had resisted like this. None had stood together as if every single life was part of a larger whole. The change was not just on the battlefield. In hidden bunkers, leaders from different nations, once rivals, began to speak openly, not as enemies, but as allies. Maps were spread out, plans were shared, and resources were pooled. For the first time in human history, humanity acted not as separate governments, but as one species. Decisions were made not for the benefit of a single country, but for the survival of all. This unity spread down to the smallest levels. Families that had lost their homes were taken in by strangers. Communities opened their doors to those who fled the front lines. Humanity, which had once seemed fragile and divided, was becoming unbreakable. And the Conquerors? They felt the change as well. Their scouts reported that instead of weakening, humans were growing stronger. Instead of fearing the tests, they were adapting. Instead of bowing, they were rising. What was meant to be a short demonstration of dominance was turning into a long, costly struggle. The Conquerors had never feared unity before because they had never faced it. Now, for the first time, they looked at humanity not as scattered individuals, but as a single, rising force. And it unsettled them. Back on Earth, something else was happening, something even more powerful than unity. Humanity was beginning to believe in victory. At first, survival had been the only goal. But as stories of resistance spread and small victories grew, people began to imagine a different ending. Maybe this invasion would not end with submission. Maybe, just maybe, it would end with the Conquerors defeated. This shift in belief was more dangerous to the invaders than any weapon. Belief spread faster than fire. It reached soldiers on the front lines, workers in factories, families in hiding, and children who whispered it to one another in the dark. We can win. The Conquerors had tested humanity's strength, but in doing so, they had revealed its greatest weapon, unity fueled by hope. And now, that weapon was being sharpened. It was not perfect, of course. There were still moments of doubt, still losses that cut deep, still nights when fear crept in. But even in those moments, humanity held on. Because now, every person knew. They were not fighting alone. They were part of something larger, something unstoppable. When the Conquerors next looked down at Earth, they did not see scattered resistance. They saw a planet standing tall, a species that refused to break, and a unity that glowed brighter than any weapon. Humanity was no longer just surviving. Humanity was preparing to show the conquerors that they had misjudged this world, preparing to prove that the species they thought weak was, in truth, stronger than they could have ever imagined. The day was coming when humanity would not just stand together in defense, but would rise together in defiance. The conquerors had come to Earth expecting submission. What they had found was unity, and that was something no empire could easily defeat. The war had dragged on longer than anyone had expected. At first, the conquerors believed they were in control. Their machines roamed the skies, their weapons shattered defenses, and their fleets circled above Earth like predators waiting for the final strike. They thought they were moments away from crushing the last spark of resistance. But they did not realize that humans had been learning, adapting, and waiting for the right moment. That moment was about to come. The world was still scarred and battered. Cities were damaged, landscapes burned, and countless lives had been changed forever. Yet beneath those scars, something stronger was growing. Humanity was no longer scattered. It was no longer reacting blindly to attacks. It was moving with purpose. It was united, and it was ready. The turning point did not come from one battle, one weapon, or one single leader. It came from everywhere at once, from small victories piling up into something far greater. In the mountains, resistance fighters had managed to destroy a massive alien supply crawler, leaving entire fleets without resources. In the seas, submarines that had once seemed outdated struck at alien ships and proved that Earth's waters were not safe for invaders. In the skies, pilots began pushing back, using clever tactics and sheer bravery to outmaneuver machines that had once seemed unstoppable. Every success was small compared to the conquerors' vast power, but together, they created something new: momentum. Humanity was no longer just surviving, it was advancing. This shift was felt deeply by ordinary people. Families who had once hidden in fear began stepping forward to help. Farmers who had been cut off from the world began feeding entire towns. Engineers repaired what seemed broken beyond repair. Every act, no matter how small, added to the sense that something was changing. Humanity was no longer at the mercy of events. It was shaping them. The conquerors noticed. Their commanders began to argue. Reports came in showing that human resistance was spreading faster than they could suppress it. Their machines, designed to crush quickly and efficiently, were being slowed, ambushed, and destroyed in ways they had not planned for. They had underestimated humans once, but now they realized their mistake too late. The true turning point came not just from battles, but from a single truth: humans refused to give up. For the conquerors, war was a matter of dominance and submission. For humanity, war had become survival and freedom. That difference made every human fight with a strength the conquerors could not match. What shocked the invaders most was how humans had turned weakness into strength. Where resources ran thin, humans improvised. Where technology failed, they found creative solutions. Where morale should have collapsed, it grew stronger. Even the harsh environment of Earth itself, its storms, its cold, its rugged terrain, fought on humanity's side. The conquerors called it a death world, but to humans it was home, and they knew how to use every part of it. In one decisive moment, a massive assault was launched on a major human stronghold. The conquerors expected it to break humanity's backbone. Instead, it became the opposite. The defenders did not collapse under the pressure. They held the line, wave after wave, day after day, until the invaders had to retreat. That single defense became a symbol across the world. For the first time, humanity had not just survived a large-scale assault. They had forced the conquerors back. News of this spread like wildfire. People whispered it in shelters, shouted it in towns, and broadcasted on hidden frequencies. We can win. That phrase became more than words. It became belief. And belief was the greatest weapon humanity had ever discovered. This belief turned into strategy. Leaders across the world began coordinating in ways never seen before. Nations that had once guarded their secrets now shared them openly. Weapons were redesigned, tactics refined, and knowledge pooled. Humanity began thinking like one mind, moving like one body, and fighting like one force. The conquerors had divided countless worlds before, but this time, unity stood in their way. The invaders tried once more to crush this spirit. They increased their attacks, bringing down more ships, more weapons, more destruction. But each strike now only fueled humanity's resolve. For every building destroyed, 10 more shelters rose. For every soldier lost, 100 more stood in their place. The conquerors did not realize that they were no longer fighting against individuals. They were fighting against the will of an entire species. And then came the moment that changed everything. Humanity launched its first large-scale counterattack. It was not perfect, it was not polished, and it did not rely on overwhelming firepower. It relied on courage, unity, and the knowledge gained from months of suffering. Resistance fighters, soldiers, civilians, and leaders moved together as one. Strikes were coordinated across continents. Ambushes were launched in forests, deserts, and ruined cities. In space, stolen technology was used in daring raids against alien ships. For the first time, the conquerors were forced to retreat, not from one small skirmish, but from a planet-wide push. It was not total victory, but it was the first step toward it. Humanity had taken the fight from defense to offense. This was the turning point. From that day onward, fear shifted. For so long it had rested on the shoulders of humans. But now, for the first time, the conquerors felt it themselves. They looked down at the planet they had called weak and broken, and they realized the truth. They had awakened something they could not control. The invaders had believed that by testing humanity, they would break it. Instead, they had revealed its greatest strength. They had shown humans what they were capable of when united, and they had given them something worth fighting for together. The air on Earth seemed different after that turning point. It was still heavy with smoke and sorrow, but it carried something else too: hope. And hope spread faster than fear. People began to rebuild even in the middle of war. Schools opened again in underground shelters. Markets reappeared in the ruins of cities. Music, laughter, and stories returned. These were not signs of weakness, but of defiance. Humanity was telling the conquerors, "You cannot break us. We will endure, we will fight, and we will rise." Conquerors had never seen this before. They had defeated countless species with overwhelming force, but none had ever dared to fight back in such a way. None had turned despair into determination. None had transformed survival into defiance. Turning point was not just about weapons or battles. It was about identity. Humanity had rediscovered itself, not as divided nations, not as scattered groups, but as one species standing on one world, ready to fight for its future. The conquerors, watching from above, began to understand something dangerous. They were no longer in control of this war. Humanity was. And as the world turned toward the future, every human, whether soldier or civilian, carried the same thought deep in their heart. This is our world, and no matter what it takes, we will never let it go. The war that had once seemed impossible to survive was finally turning in humanity's favor. What began as chaos, despair, and destruction had become something else, something no conqueror had ever expected. The invaders who had once landed, with arrogance and confidence, were now forced to retreat step by step. The humans they thought were weak had turned into an unstoppable force, and the memory of this resistance would leave scars not only on Earth, but also on the invaders themselves. For humanity, victory was not just about reclaiming land or driving the enemy back. It was about proving a truth that would echo for generations. Humans could not be broken. They had endured fire, loss, and fear, and they had transformed all of it into courage and unity. But while humans celebrated their survival, the conquerors carried something different back with them, a new kind of fear they had never known before. The legacy of fear began the day the invaders realized they were no longer feared. At first, their machines and warships had made humanity tremble. But after months of resistance, after watching cities rise again from rubble, and after witnessing people laugh and sing even in the middle of war, the conquerors understood that fear no longer belonged to humans. It belonged to them. Across the battlefield, this change was clear. Human fighters no longer hid, they hunted. They no longer fought in desperation. They fought with strategy, with patience, and with fire in their hearts. For the invaders, every step forward now carried risk. Every shadow might hide a trap. Every ruined building could be the beginning of an ambush. This was not just war, it was a message. Humanity was saying, "If you come for us, you will pay a price you cannot imagine." The conquerors began to retreat, but even retreat was not enough. Their own soldiers whispered of humans as if they were monsters born from a world too harsh to understand. They spoke of Earth not as a planet, but as a trap. They gave it a new name in their own language, the Deathworld. And with that name came the understanding that this planet and its people were different from anything they had faced before. The legacy of fear was not built on one battle or one victory. It was built on the memory of a species that refused to bow. Other worlds had fallen quickly to the conquerors. Other species had surrendered, broken by fear. But humanity was the exception. And because of that, the conquerors now feared not only humans, but what would happen if other species learned from them? The story of Earth began to spread. Whispers carried across the stars of a species that had stood against impossible odds, a species that had taken pain and turned it into power, a species that had shown the galaxy that fear could be overcome. And as those whispers grew, so too did the conquerors' unease. Back on Earth, humans began rebuilding, but they never forgot what they had endured. Families carried stories of bravery, sacrifice, and defiance. Children grew up hearing tales of how their people had refused to kneel, how they had fought not just with weapons, but with spirit. These stories were not only about survival, they were about identity. They reminded every new generation that they belonged to a species that had once stared into the face of annihilation and said no. This memory became a shield. It became a warning to anyone who might think of threatening Earth again. The conquerors had left, but their fear remained, echoing through the stars. No matter how advanced their weapons or how powerful their fleets, they would always remember the world they could not break. And for humanity, that fear was a victory in itself. It meant safety, not just for Earth, but for the future. The invaders would think twice before returning, and others who heard the stories might think twice before trying at all. Humanity had earned a new kind of respect, not through diplomacy or wealth, but through struggle and resilience. But the legacy of fear was not only external, it was also internal. Humans themselves had learned to never underestimate their own strength. They had discovered that unity could overcome any enemy, that courage could defeat despair, and that hope could outlast even the darkest times. These lessons shaped the way the world moved forward. Nations that had once been divided found new reasons to work together. Communities that had been broken slowly healed, carrying pride in what they had survived. And people everywhere carried the same thought in their hearts. We are stronger than we ever knew. The conquerors had wanted to dominate humanity, but instead they had given them a gift, unshakable belief in themselves. That belief became the foundation of Earth's future. It guided how humanity rebuilt, how it advanced, and how it looked to the stars. For the invaders, however, the memory of Earth became a shadow they could not escape. Whenever their fleets planned new campaigns, someone would whisper, "Remember the humans." Whenever a commander grew overconfident, another would remind them, even the Deathworlders stood unbroken. Fear, once used as a weapon, now belonged to the invaders themselves. This was humanity's greatest victory. Not just survival, not just rebuilding, but planting fear into the hearts of those who had once ruled without challenge. It was a legacy that stretched beyond Earth, beyond the war, and into the very fabric of galactic memory. As time passed, Earth flourished again. Forests grew where battles had once raged. Cities rose from ashes, stronger and brighter. But even in peace, the memory of the struggle never faded. Memorials stood in towns and cities, honoring those who had fought. Songs and stories carried their bravery forward. Humanity did not forget its pain, but it did not let that pain control it. Instead, it turned the memory into strength, into unity, and into pride. The Conquerors had arrived thinking they would write the story of Earth's end. Instead, humanity wrote the story of their fear. That story would outlive every ship, every weapon, and every battle. It would remain as a reminder, carved into history. Do not underestimate humans. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. Do not set foot on their world unless you are ready to face the storm. In the end, the legacy of fear was not just about war. It was about transformation. It was about how one species, tested to its limits, discovered the true depth of its strength. It was about how the galaxy learned that even the most powerful conquerors could fall. And it was about how fear, once a tool of the invaders, became humanity's greatest shield. Earth stood, scarred but unbroken, and the stars carried a message that would never be forgotten. Humanity had faced the conquerors, and in the end, it was the conquerors who had been broken.